First thing I would like to say, it's about these pictures you have here. I hope everybody has got a copy. They are borrowed, and it's real and correct title, which I didn't give last time, is War Without Mercy, Race and Power in the Pacific War. And I would like to say that if you should read only one book in relation with this course, it should be this one, John Darwin. If you read other one, it's okay, but this one first. Okay, so now since my watchdogs told me that I shouldn't talk too long, I will present a shorter paper, only 5 pages. It's too much, but still shorter than last time. And I will do my best in order to shorten more and more until nothing will be left. Okay, so I will talk today about animalization of the enemy as a state in the context of total war. The immediate consequence of the attack by surprise on Pearl Harbor was that Japan became, for the United States, a total and absolute enemy. As I already mentioned last time, the total enemy has not only to be defeated, it has to be annihilated. According to the code which governs the relations between nations and states at the modern age in Europe, an armed conflict between two sovereigns should not lead to the annihilation of the defeated part. It should lead to some kind of arrangement, that is, generally speaking, a peace treaty between the two conflicting sovereigns, and this going with various concessions, compensations from the defeated part, territories, money, etc. In such a configuration, as Carl Schmitt, German author, notices, the enemy has a status, and this regime of hostility is fully based on mutual recognition, which means that the two conflicting parts fight each other bitterly, desperately, but the defeated monarch is not exterminated. The prisoners taken to war on the battlefield are not killed. The occupied territories are, of course, more often plundered, but the local populations are not whipped out from the earth, and finally peace is restored after war. Hostility, as Carl Schmitt says, is an extreme degree, a high level of dissension or dissociation, but this doesn't mean that the enemy is a monster. You may fight against him with the strength born of desperation, but this does not mean that you detest him or despise him. You even can have great regard for him as a fierce but loyal opponent. So this is the general rule at a modern age in Europe. But of course, this rule is not carved in stone. It does not apply to the relations with other kinds of people, that is barbarians, savages, pagans, heretics, that is Muslims, Arabs and Turks, Amerindians at the time of the conquest of America, black Africans, etc. And this factor, of course, has been of a decisive importance as European colonialism and imperialism expansion have taken place. Second remark, or it's rather a question, but which drives us back to our problem. Does this general rule, does this European model also apply to the history of the United States? I have strong doubts about it. For if we put apart the Civil War, all of the armed conflicts in which the United States as a state or a nation in formation have been involved throughout its, after all, relatively short and young story or history, are mixed up with the so-called race conflicts and stakes, and are indissociable from the question of the border which always remains undecided, and this for a very long time, let's say almost until the First World War. So we have here a model of development of the nation state which is very different from the European. A model of conflicting relations with others, that is neighbors, which cannot be drawn back to this hypothetical European model. European model being, I repeated, that of the conflict between two sovereigns whose status is equal. And this issue, I believe, is crucial since we have to try to understand how the conflict with Japan, conflict between the United States and Japan, could be so rapidly and so vehemently rationalized. So let's keep in memory these substantial differences between European history and North American history. So far, the issue of political hostility, and I said political hostility, which means the enemy as hostis in Latin, and not as private enemy, inimicus in Latin. The two notions are different. So far the issue of political hostility is concerned, these differences do matter a lot for our subject. And I would like to add a brief remark about the history of modern democracy in general and the animal or the beast as a political state. It is an immemorial tradition in all kinds of societies and cultures, I imagine, that one calls his enemy, and whatever kind of enemy might be here, calls him an animal or a beast. Calling this enemy by, let's say, animals' names is certainly one of the simplest ways of giving free rein to the contempt, to the anger, to the horror he or she as an enemy inspires you. It is the simplest way of breaking up the human link that binds you to him or to her. It is also a rule that this, let's say, operation consisting in downgrading a human being into some kind of an animal, this operation has the appearance of violence as its close horizon and consequence. I imagine that it is easier to kill somebody after this kind of, let's say, work in imagination and in language has been done. That is, after an angry subject has convinced himself that this other actually is some kind of a rat or a vermin or a snake or whatever. This kind of process is only present in traditional forms or uses of politics. That is, they are at the heart of mimetic conducts. What I mean by mimetic conducts is, okay, retaliation, vendetta, and so on. And now, in Western Europe, the invention of democratic culture, a long process which goes over centuries and which is all but harmonious and in a straight line. This long process has as one of its main features the disjunction of the practice of conflict and of the animalization of the adversary or of the opponent. Or in other terms, what is typical for this process is the transformation of the traditional enemy, who is basically some kind of an animal, into an adversary or opponent. Modern democracy is, of course, very conflicting, but it is a general device meant for canalizing, redirecting potential violence into, let's say, discursive operations. The consequence of this is that the traditional way of animalizing the person or the group or the party, general sense, one is in conflict with, has to be given up. The symbolic importance of this term is crucial. It means that the conflict is bound by new rules set up in the horizon of pacification of politics. Politics as a specific sphere for human activities. It is meant for, let's say, unplugging politics from the eruption of direct and massive violence from mimetic behaviors, etc. I wrote about 15 years ago a book which deals exactly with this issue, which is called in French Le corps de l'ennemi, hyperviolence et démocratie. That means approximately in English, the body of the enemy, hyperviolence and democracy. I don't exactly remember what I wrote in this book, but I remember only the general outline, but I have still in memory a very beautiful text by Victor Hugo, which I quote and analyze at great length in the book. That is a long political poem called Châtiment, means punishment or castigation, and which is like set up at the reversal point between a traditional use and practice of the enemy and a modern, that is a democratic move, this suspension of extreme violence that goes along with the end of the animalization of the enemy. This poem by Victor Hugo is a lampoon written in the 50s of 19th century, a virulent attack launched against the impostor, that is, with Napoleon Bonaparte and his clique, this after the coup d'etat of December 51. And in this poem, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the candidate for dictatorship, and his attendants are, properly, literally speaking, called by Hugo under all the names of animals under the sun. Hyenas, vipers, pigs, etc. But at a certain moment, the poet asks his readers, so, since these people, this bunch, are such beasts and vile animals, should we not kill them, destroy them? And at that moment, an unexpected reversal occurs. For Hugo says, no, let us stop, let us suspend the vindictive gesture. Because this is the only way to display our humanity, the only way to show how different we the people, are from these monsters. So let's blame them, let's denounce them, let's expose these monsters, but let us spare their life, or their lives. And for me, this poem by Hugo is inaugural and predictive because it marks a radical change in the handling of the enemy as modern democratic culture becomes established and as democratic, let's say, sensibilities assert themselves. That means that in general, in democratic conditions, the return of politics of animalization of the enemy always have to be taken into consideration as a sign for a crisis of the democratic institutions. In the Germany of the 1930s, the successful attempt of the Nazis to destroy the democratic institutions of the Weimar Republic and the racialization of politics based on the stigmatization of the Jews as parasites or as lice, as rats, both factors are in the social world. So, to get back to our subject, in the case of the war in the Pacific, we note that an open conflict appears between democratic norms, which ban the traditional practices tending to the animalization of the enemy, and the requirements and needs of total war. And this is what war movies of that time, and also after the war, are the perfect witnesses of. The massive return of this traditional regime of hostility in democratic conditions, in a democratic society, can be described as a regression, or in terms we can borrow from well-known sociologists like Norbert Elias or Zygmunt Bauman, it is a move towards decivilization. Even when it is placed under the sign of emergency, that is a sign of an imminent threat, after Pearl Harbor, of course, such a move is not so easy to carry out at the scale of a whole society. A whole society which has been modeled and shaped by democratic norms. We can easily understand that any individual, or let's say almost any individual, can, under, let's say, very unusual circumstances, blow up stuff in a fit of anger or rage, and then go beyond the point of no return, that is, kill somebody or whatever, on the kind. But convincing a whole nation that another people, another nation, and not a small one, that is an old-rivered civilization with which it has, with which an open conflict has cropped up recently, to convince the whole nation that this other nation is made of subhuman monsters and virtual animals, this is not true. This kind of change cannot just result from a decision, a political decision, from a decree by an authority, an institution, or a power. This is something which has to be whacked out, stubborn. This is a work which has to take place, let's say, in the depth of narratives, in general. And it goes, this work, it goes through the capture of the imagination of the public. It goes through an intense and persevering work. All this in terms of language, pictures, representation, etc. And this is where, of course, new communication devices like cinema, like radio, like television are so important. Let's take a very simple example. If your aim is that the public gets used to the idea that the enemy has not only military power, but the people, a nation. The enemy has to be destroyed. The enemy has to be smashed into pieces, and not only defeated. So if your aim is this, you have first to, let's say, erase his usual and proper name, and you have to rename the enemy. So the public, in our case, the public has to get used not to say anymore the Japanese people, but the Japs. This act of renaming is of decisive importance, for it is the first step of annihilation. It is different in that respect from something which is very common in history of communities in the United States. That is this gesture consisting in giving bad names to a despised or suspect community, work for Italians, Greek for Jews, Polak for Polish, and so on. And you will notice from the film clips or extracts, you will see how important these linguistic stakes are for our subject. The renaming of the Jap or Ni, it is an opening to its animalization. Having been kept from his full name, having lost his full name, it has already lost almost his human status. Under the conditions of total war, this has very immediate consequences. It very often, not always, but it very often means, during the Pacific War, no prisoners during the battles. It means also green light for the terrorist bombings of the cities of Japan. That is, bombing of the populations and not only military or industrial targets. And of course, it is a precondition for the use of the atomic weapon in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But it is also the precondition for very barbaric, regressive uses of the body of the enemy. Like the well-known habit of making ears necklaces, that is, cutting ears from the bodies of dead Japanese soldiers. As John Dowers reports in his book, this habit was so much the rage among the American troops that during the war in the Pacific, the military authority had constantly to remind the soldiers who went on leave, that is to the United States, that it was strictly forbidden to bring home this kind of unprofit. Ears, necklaces, skulls, bones, the teeth, gold teeth, this kind of thing. In this respect, we have to devote our attention to the relation between the fact that this war is a race war, which means also both racial and racist, and the forms of violence which go with it, or, if you prefer, the regime of hostility that prevails in it. We can very easily see how decisive that factor is if we compare this war with the war on the European front, which, from the American standpoint, is not a race war. It is not only that, as John Dower says, the Japanese were more hated than the Germans by the American public and probably the American soldiers. It is that the racial dimension of the conflict has immediate and massive consequences in terms of behaviors at war, or from the angle, let's say, of an anthropology of war. On this issue, I quote Dower again. It is virtually inconceivable that teeth, ears, and skulls could have been collected from German or Italian war dead and publicized in the Anglo-American countries without provoking an uproar. And in this, we have yet another inkling of the racial dimension of the war. And here again, films are first quality witnesses of this difference between the two fronts. If you watch at some of the classical commando films, which present operations taking place on the Western Front, I mean classics like, very well-known classics like The Dirty Dozen by Robert Aldous, or The Guns of Navarone by Jack Lee Thompson, both shot in the 60s. So if you watch these films, you will inevitably come across that kind of scene, standard scene. At a certain moment, for the needs of the action, one or some of the members of the American or British or Allied commando has or have to pass oneself off as an enemy soldier. So he or they have to manage to steal German uniforms, and as they meet other German soldiers, they have to try to speak German, or at least they have to make as if they understood German. And in general, this trick works in this case. It works. Why? Just because an American or a British body can, as a rule, easily pass for a German body. And American soldiers who speak German are not such a rare exception, some of them being, of course, from German origin. In brief, in this kind of configuration, the enemy, even if the confrontation is relentless, the enemy is a classical enemy. For in terms of race, of culture, of civilization, it is not so distant from the Americans. Another sign of this, at a completely another level, is that we have to remember that until Pearl Harbor, Hollywood always was very reluctant in producing anti-fascist and anti-Nazi films, and this just for opportunistic reasons. Germany was a non-negligible market for its production, and on the other hand, the pro-Nazi lobby was powerful in all the United States, in politics, in society, in the 30s, including in Hollywood. Now, if you compare these conditions with what the Hollywood films on the Pacific War present us, you will discover a completely different panorama. Very obviously, it would not be enough for an American soldier to borrow, steal the Japanese uniform to use the kind of trick I just mentioned. In the dozens of American films on the war in the Pacific I watched and studied, there is only one example for which refutes what I just said. And this example is very illuminating from the post-colonial point of view. It is in Twin Talkers, a film by John Hook, that is a filmmaker from Hong Kong working in Hollywood. The film focuses on the participation of young men from Navajo origin in the Marine Corps, in the Pacific War. These soldiers, Indians, are used as radio coders, translating the orders and other messages from English into Navajo language, which is the language that the Japanese decoders are quite unable to decipher. At a certain moment in the action of the film, a combat unit finds itself in a very exposed and even desperate position during very hard battle. The radio of this unit has been smashed by a shrapnel, and the battle leader of this small group of soldiers needs to communicate urgently with the rear, with his superior. So, the only solution is that one of these soldiers would sneak into the Japanese lines and steal the transmitter. The patrol leader is immediately aware that the only member of his unit who can pass for a Japanese is the Indian, because he's dark, he's stocky, he's not too tall. And he will have to do the job. He will have to cut the throat of a Japanese sentry to wear his uniform and to steal the radio. This scene, I think, is crucial, for it throws a very crude light on the logic of the presentation of race differences, or what we could call the grammar of species, in this kind of configuration. What is unveiled is some kind of Orientalist, supremacist Western rule, according to which all the non-Caucasian bodies look more or less alike. Movies on the Pacific, on the war in the Pacific and in Eastern Asia constantly enforce this rule, according to the constraints of the production of the films. Let's take some example. If you suppose that you have to shoot a film war, a jungle war film, which is supposed to take place in the Philippines, in the mountains of the Philippines. And you have to shoot this film, for, of course, economic reasons, in a botanic garden which is located in California. In that case, actors and extras from Mexican origin will make perfect Filipino guerrillas. If you shoot some other of these films somewhere in Queensland, Australia, local Asian students from very different origins will be excellent Japanese soldiers. During the war, at the time at the Nikkei, that is the Japanese American people, were detained after Pearl Harbor, as these people were detained in some kind of internment camps, not exactly concentration camps, but let's say internment camps. The role of the treacherous Japanese had to be performed by actors from Chinese origin, if not by heavily made up Caucasian actors, as we will see in one of the clips we will show. And I even can, and I mention it because it's funny, it's entertaining. We even can mention a film which is called Destination Gobi by Robert Wise, well-known filmmaker, with as a star Richard Widmark. A film which, as the title says, whose action takes place, is set in Mongolia, but which had to be shot, of course, not in Mongolia, but in Nevada. And in that case, an Indian tribe, the Indians Pintes, local tribe, have been playing with success the Mongolian shepherds, horsemen, and warriors. So you see to what extent, almost without any limit, this law, which lays down the equivalence of any dark-skinned body, that is, of any colonial body, with any other one, can apply in various conditions. Very obviously, of course, cinema draws here from a very deep, let's say, cultural well in Western body culture and in Western, let's say, culture of the visible. But as maybe paradoxical, unexpected result, this situation makes a wide opening on a post-colonial perspective. Windtalkers is not a very good war film. It has too many special effects, etc. But it is fascinating. It is very fascinating from a post-colonial angle. A very fascinating post-colonial film shot in the States by a non-native, let's say, a filmmaker from Hong Kong. In this film, for example, the forms of violence which are used in the Pacific War, these forms of violence are constantly put together, compared with the Indian Wars. That is the extermination of the Indian tribes. And in a conversation with other soldiers, a Marine talks about his grandfather, who was an Indian hunter, collecting, for money of course, the ears of the Comanches he killed. And this anecdote, this story, of course, is some kind of a wink at the present of the Pacific War, because it sets up some kind of a genealogy of extreme violence in the context of the encounter with very different others, and this happening always on the constantly moving border of the American power. And this is where I stop. Of course, you can see Windtalkers or this scene I'm trying to describe, but today we will not have time to show it, so you can see it after the DVD is available.
我做一个简单的中文摘要啊。 自从珍珠港事件之后，日本已经成为美国最大的敌人。明确的讲是所谓的绝对的敌人。敌人有两种，一般定义的敌人和绝对的敌人。这两者之间的差别是，你不仅要征服对方，同时要毁灭对方。自从文艺复兴以来，根据欧洲的规范，两个国家或两个主权之间的战争，它的目的不是在摧毁对方，而是要寻求缔结和平的条约。例如以割地赔款或其他的方式来谈和止战。如果根据卡什米特的说法，敌人是有身份的，战争是基于双方的认可。交战双方在交战的时候，苏方不会被毁灭，俘虏不会被虐待用刑，被敌人占领地区的民众也不会被杀害。因此，敌人是我们战斗的对象，敌人并不是恶魔。战争是拼的你输我赢，而不是你死我活。这是欧洲的法则，它并不适用于穆斯林或国家或是非洲国家，也不适用于帝国主义的延伸或是被殖民地区。但是一个问题是，这个规范是否适用于美国？我对此深感怀疑，因为除了美国的内战与所谓的南北战争之外，所有美国以国家之名所发动或参与的战争，都属于种族战争的范围，如美国和印第安人、墨西哥人的战争，这和欧洲的国家民族战争有很大的不同，其冲突关系也不能和欧洲相提并论。欧洲的战争有两国的对等关系，我们由此可观察到为什么美国对日本的战争会走向种族化，这是第一点。第二点是民族与动物在政治的重要性。回顾历史，我们可以在各个时代和不同文化社会中看到对敌人的描绘，将敌人视为动物禽兽，这是对敌人的仇恨和蔑视最直接的表达，也是切断和敌人关系最简便的方法。一旦我们认为对方是禽兽、是动物的时候，我们要施展暴力就能够得心应手。现在的欧洲因为民主文化的发明，其实就成了冲突和将敌人禽兽化的一个分水岭。现代民主将传统的敌人转化为对手，现代民主处理暴力是朝向协商讨论的方向，必须放弃将敌人禽兽化，有这样的政治才能够避免大规模的冲突和以暴制暴。Brossat老师刚刚提到那个雨果的一个诗篇，那在这个诗篇里面，雨果是以那个路易邦拿巴他的政变作为一个讽刺这些路易邦拿巴还有他的同伙，他是以老鼠啊、狮子啊那些来讽刺他。那他的朋友就说，那他们既然是这都是一些狼狈的，我们是不是应该把他杀害？那雨果说不要，就是我们只要去遏制他们的兽性，以此呈现说我们是人类，所以保存了他的生命。这就像我们所说的，人之异于禽兽几息，人之不能去摧毁对方的。那雨果的诗也就宣告民主时代的来临。所谓的民主，就是从对待敌人的方式彻底改变做起。但我们却在民主的境况中看到了将敌人禽兽化的政治，这就是民主政治、民主文化制度的一个危机。像1930年代的德国纳粹政权摧毁了威玛共和的民主制度，而兴起种族化的政治，这是建立在将犹太人视为狮子、臭虫和老鼠这些令社会大众变革的象征。现在再回到我们的主题，在太平洋战争的案例中，我们也注意到了有排除禽兽化的民主规范和完全战争这样的一个公开的冲突，而电影就是冲突的最佳见证。在民主境况里，以立即的威胁，好比像轰炸珍珠港这样，而使得传统对立方式的赔款可以视为某种倒退，甚至是所谓的去文明化。事实上，我们很难将处在民主条件中的社会倒退为将敌人视为禽兽的境况。这不是某个权力当局就能够做决定，然后下一道命令就能够达成的。这需要有一个周全的准备、转换，需要掌握群众的想象空间。 应用语言、叙事和影像做深层的准备，因此电影、电视和广播就有了重要性。敌人不仅是军队，敌人是整个的民族国家，敌人必须彻底消灭，而这首先就是要让他们的名字消失，再重新命名。因此，美国的民众必须习惯将日本人称为 "Japanese"， 甚至是 "Monkey"。这个在我们从电影中就可以看到。失去了名字，就失去他作为人的身份，然后立即的效果就是完全的战争，在战场上必须全部歼灭，全部轰炸，而不只是轰炸军事要地。这也就是广岛长崎原爆的先决境况。那这也就成为允许以野蛮的方式来对待敌人死亡身体的先决境况。在太平洋战争中，根据那个 John Dewar 的那本书啊，在这个《残酷的战争》这本书中，有写到说，在太平洋战争中，美军将战死的日军的耳朵割下来，串成一串，然后美军的高级将领他也会禁止美国士兵在放假回去的时候，把这些耳朵啊、牙齿啊、骨头啊、头颅啊带回家当纪念品。我早说，我认为他对美军而言，第二次世界大战在太平洋战场是个种族战争。那我们很难想象说，美军在欧洲的战场会把他们所杀死的德国人的耳朵、牙齿或骨头带回家当战利品。那电影让我们再度理解到美军在太平洋和欧洲这两个战场的差异性。我们也可以从许多1960年代所拍的关于欧陆战争的片子中，很多经典名片中，你就可以看到美国跟英国的一些突击队，他们都会去出击，从事不可能的任务，而且他们常常在任务中都要穿德军的衣服，乔装成德军，然后还讲德语啊。那他们常常都能够很成功的达成他们的任务。那其实这是他们都可以穿敌人的制服跟讲敌人的语言，那是因为英国人或是美国人在他们的身体形态是可以轻易的转变为德国人。然后美军讲德语其实也不稀奇，因为在美国有很多德国的移民。因为这个语言跟文化的接近，我们可以轻易的装扮成敌人。在好莱坞的电影里面呢，美军其实不太可能穿起，我就在太平洋战争里面，穿起日本人的日军的制服的。在博少老师所看过的数十部相关电影里面，他刚刚说的唯一的例外就是香港导演吴宇森的那部《烈风行动》。在这一部2002年的所出品的电影中呢，美国就是为了不让日军去识破他们的密码，军中的这种传递的密码，因此他们为不让日军去破解，所以他们用了那个有一个印第安族叫纳瓦霍族人的他们的语言作为他们的暗语。那这个时候他们去出席那个塞班岛战争的时候，就有几个印第安人参加了那个战争。后来他们的那个收音机就坏了，那这个时候他们就必须要去偷到那个潜入日军的基地里面去偷一个收音机出来。可是谁能够穿日军的制服？不就是印第安人？因为我知道这个说法是说，因为印第安人跟日本人是一样的，对美国人来讲是一样，因为他个子不高，肤色也是一样。有黑红棕色，然后五官长相都很像日本人，所以就去当日本人。那当然在这部片子里面他也就成功了。那我早上是看从吴宇森这部电影又看到有后子女，所谓的后子女这样的色彩出来。那这一幕对多少人来讲，他最大的发现就是说，不同种族呈现在电影里面的逻辑，也就是所谓的一种种族的语法，这是西方社会的东方主义原则，就是说所有非白人的身体比例或是什么，对白人来讲都是很相近的。因此，在太平洋战争或东亚战争的电影里面，根据制片经费或者是它的条件的，它们或多或少都会受到这样的一个约束，就是说，好比说，在一场菲律宾丛林高山里面的第二次世界大战的片子里面呢， 它其实可以在加州的一个资源里面拍，那临时演员可能是加州里面找来的，他其实也不用特别去找菲律宾人来拍，他找墨西哥人来充数，当菲律宾的游击队，可能他认为对美国观众来讲其实都一样，看起来都一样。那好比说，再说我们如果说有一部电影需要很多的日本人，在澳洲的昆士兰拍的话，他其实可以从当地找很多亚洲的留学生去当临时演员就可以了。人家也分不出来，反正日本人、中国人、韩国人对他们来讲长得都是一样。然后他说，他又讲到一部在二战时间拍的一部片子，叫做《前进歌》那部片子，那也是一些美军就不小心到了在那个蒙古的沙漠里面，那他们要怎么样回到他们的舰队在胶州湾那边的舰队的，他们是怎么样从这个过程再回到那个舰队的一个过程？那中间就有很多的蒙古的骑士、蒙古的猎人，这些就跟他们发生了很多的很惊险的故事。那其实他这部片子是在美国的那个内华达州拍的，他所找的那些蒙古人其实都是当地的印第安人。就是说，他从这部片子里面，还有从吴宇森的片子里面，他特别是从吴宇森的片子里面就看到后置人的色彩。另外又是从，因为他在吴宇森这部片子里面呢，《烈风行动》里面有一段对白，很小的一个对白，就是一个美国的海军，他跟那个印第安人就会提起说，其实他的祖父以前是专门在猎杀印第安人的，然后就以那个割掉印第安人的耳朵来算数去领钱，就算他杀了几个印第安人，就以这个耳朵这样子去领钱。波尚老师说，其实从这部片子里面呢，他看到了，他其实这个是很跟太平洋战争其实是非常接近美国屠杀印第安人的种族战争的。那这是一种暴力的企图，在强势的美国人、白人和其他的印第安人、墨西哥人这样的背景，这种接触永远是非常暴力的。那美国的强势扩张不断改变他们彼此之间的边界。
So now we will see the extracts or clips of the films. So I'm just saying words in order to present what we will see. So what I'm trying to show with these extracts of films, all these films are from the period of the war itself, not afterwards. They have been shot during the war. So what I'm trying to show is the way, let's say we pass from a description, you will see in the first clips, a description of the enemy, the Japanese, as morally corrupted, completely corrupted by the militarist regime, which is a manufacturer of fanatics and brutes. So how do we pass from this qualification, that is the description of a state of moral disgrace, of moral decay and collapse of the Japanese people, how do we pass from this to the description of the Japanese as species, as some kind of an animal? And this is a whole process which results, you will see in one of the last extracts in a film called Objective Burma by Alain Walsh. It will result in making, at the end of the words Japs and monkeys, perfect synonyms. So, this is it. How professional they are. So it's beautifully led, this operation. Important thing is that all the Japanese have to be killed. All of them are killed. So it's not only, the issue is not only the radar, it's also the way this war has to be led. Kill them all. And this is keen professional work. A funny thing is that this film has been forbidden in England until 52. Why? Because as Churchill saw this film, he was so furious that he decided that it should never be shown in England. Why? Because, of course, everything looks in the film as if Burma had been liberated by Americans. And Burma was British colony, and it was reconquered actually 2 years after the British had to leave it by the British themselves. And this commando is only a part, and a small part of the whole figure. But the way it looks like for the American public is quite different. So you see this kind of conflicts and contradiction is something which happens in France, say, lies at least. So, okay, this was the first, and we will see contrasting completely with this, seeing the other one where away the Japanese army, the Japanese soldiers are supposed to lead their war. So this is the village scene with those scene, we will sequence, we will see now. I hope Commando, having missed the plane, has to split in two parts. And one of them is ambushed by the Japanese, and some of them, of those who are ambushed, have been taken prisoners by this Japanese unit. So what we see is how the other parts of the Americans reaches this village and finds what you will see.
就是说，像我们刚刚看到那个日本人把有一些他们抓到分尸啊，然后这边有一个是受到了很大的用刑所处死。那这个记者就是说，我当了30年的记者，我看过很多种杀人的方式、刑求的方式，或者是像黑道的他们那种在彼此之间的争斗，或者是那种很多杀人的方式。可是我从来没有看过这真的是这是完全是两回事。他说这些人，这种人我们应该把他们彻底消灭掉，要把他们从地球上消失。
From tactical or military point of view, absolutely meaningless. Soldiers sitting on the top of the palm trees. How do they climb up there with their rifles or machine guns? So it's only, let's say, propagandist image or picture, associating, of course, those Japanese soldiers with the beings which have to be on the top of the palm trees, that is monkeys. What matters is only this suggestion, monkeys. So that's why I choose this short sequence from Burma talk. As these American prisoners, here what they are charged of, that is this accusation of having bombed civilians, cities, they cannot accept it, and they say that it's not true. Our targets were only military, industrial targets. And this is the official version of that time. But now you see at the end, as they have discovered what the Japanese really are through this, what happened during the trial, he says, he who speaks for all of them, he says, okay, now we have understood and we will destroy all your cities. So this is the political lesson of the film, and of course the justification of what will happen at the end of the war, the destruction of Tokyo and other cities.